Some of you may know me. I'm Ed Manning. I'm the Executive Director for Leadership Asheville. It's a program of UNC Asheville. You may have seen, how many of you have been to a Buzz breakfast during the summer? Okay, so you've seen me there. I recognize a whole lot of faces. The TDA asked me to facilitate this event this evening, really MC this event this evening, and I'm thrilled to do that because part of our job at Leadership Asheville is to convene the community for conversations, for civic engagement and civil discourse. And so what we do at the Buzz Breakfast is try and present information to the community about the issues and challenges we're facing. And so again, I feel like this is kind of part of what we're supposed to be doing. So before we get into it, let me just recognize a few key groups and folks who are here tonight. Our elected officials in the room, Buncombe County Chairman Brownie Newman. Brownie, are you here? Would you stand there? Yes, thanks, Brownie. Robin Ramsey from Senator Burr's office. Robin, are you here? Robin may be here. Okay. Joe Belcher, Buncombe County Commissioner. Al Whitesides, Buncombe County Commissioner. Mayor Esther Manheimer, City of Asheville. Did I miss any other elected officials? If you are, stand and wave now. Great. If you're a member of the TDA Board of Directors, the Tourism Product Development Fund Committee, or the Tourism Management and Investment Plan Steering Committee, would you please raise your hand and wave? Great, thank you. Let's thank them for being here. I also want to recognize the Tourism Management and Investment Plan Community Leadership Council. Would you raise your hand? All right. Thank you for being here tonight. We also have several city county staff here who are with us. If you're a staff member at city or county, raise your hand. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. And I'd like to ask, how many of you are native to Asheville? Raise your hand. Oh, good. They say it's a unicorn. We got lots of unicorns in the room. How many moved here in the last 5-10 years? 10, 15 years. Okay. All right. And those of you who moved here, did you visit Asheville before you moved here? How many of you visited Asheville at least once? So you're all tourists. Just checking, except for the few natives we have, the rest of you are all tourists. So you've been impacted or you've been a tourist. I actually just got back from Spain. I was visiting in Barcelona. My son's doing a semester abroad over there. It was great. I don't know if you've been there. How many of you are familiar with Anton Gaudi? Yeah, famous architecture. He's got some beautiful work in the city. And they struggle with the same problem of how many tourists are too much. I was walking with my son up to Park Güell, which is one of the ones he's created. It's a beautiful park. And there's this big, painted in English no less, spray painted on the stairs on the way up that say tourists go home. And I was like, wow, I really hope we as a community never get to that place. Because one, if you haven't seen his work and you get a chance to go, it is worth doing. It is just beautiful work. And certainly the Sangria de Familia, the church, the cathedral they're building, almost complete, is absolutely stunning. And I would hate for that community to say, no, don't come see this, because it's just absolutely gorgeous. And again, we've got to balance that same tension here, and that's part of what this process is about that we're talking tonight. So, in your program, you're going to find some facts about Buncombe County Tourist Development Authority and how the occupancy tax works. There's also information about the 39 different programs that have received grants through the Product Development Fund, everything from greenways and infrastructures in the River Arts District to Anchor Recreation Destination, the YMI Cultural Center, Pack Square Park, Asheville Museum of Science, the Collider, the list goes on and on. This community grant program, established by state law in 2001 with an increase in the occupancy tax paid by our overnight visitors, is undergoing a monumental shift. And that's partly because our community is also in shift and flux, and we do these things together. It's going from an application-based process to a long-range investment process, a strategy created with the community input and in collaboration with public entities. So the initiative is called the Buncombe County Tourism Management and Investment Plan to Develop Community Assets, or TMIP. I hope I said that right, TMIP. It's a 4-phase project that started last spring, and it's expected to be completed this coming spring. The objective of TMIP is to become more proactive and strategic in how the revenue from the Tourism Product Development Fund is invested in future years. So tonight is an overview of Phase 1. Phase 1 is now coming to a close. You're going to hear about the research that the project has conducted from 2 of the members of the team. We're going to include some results from the community and the visitors surveys that were done. There was also public workshops and meetings with numerous community stakeholders. So we'll give you some results back from those. Following that, we'll have a brief panel discussion about the topics and issues that have come out of those surveys. So before I turn it over to our speakers and to our panel, just go over some ground rules for tonight. Tourism has kind of become a diversive topic in not just Asheville, but around the nation, around the world, certainly that way in Barcelona. And cities and towns that are experiencing growth from tourism, I really wanted to show slides. Kevin Frazier, who's a historian and native of Asheville, has done a lot of work for Leadership Asheville. I'm very grateful for that. Slides of what it looked like in 1980. Those of you who are native here can share your stories, and if you weren't here in 1980, raise your hand again if you're native. Find one of these folks and ask them what it was like. The pictures are amazing. The downtown is boarded up. The Fine Arts Theater is a XXX movie theater. It's really a very stark difference between what it was and what it is now. Okay? And so looking at that growth, we really have to understand that there were 5 T's that created Asheville: timber, textile, tobacco, tuberculosis, and tourism. You can say 4 of them may be gone. Well, we still have healthcare, so maybe 3 of them are gone. And I'm not sure those 3 were really the ones we really wanted to have as our economic drivers, because then they'd be stripping the trees off the mountains that we love. So when we look at it, I've learned a lot about tourism and economic engine, and I'm not here to persuade you one way or the other, but it is a fact of what has created the abundance that we now have in this community. So I want to acknowledge that there are people with lots of different viewpoints here tonight. Some of you that will agree or disagree, that's fine. What I ask you to do is let's do it respectfully. Part of having civic discourse is to be able to talk civilly with one another. So really, we're not looking for folks to heckle. If you've got an opinion and want to voice that, there's ways to do it. We'll talk about that at the end. There's a forum and an online website where you can continue to put your opinion in. We would appreciate that. So we want to keep this as a civic discussion tonight. Also, we'll give you information on how to access the full report and the survey results. It's all on the website. We'll give you that at the very end. So with that, I'd like to introduce and welcome to the podium Mike Cozen, who's the president of PGAV Inc. It's the firm that's leading this project and the project team for the Tourism Management and Investment Plan. Mike, let's give him a welcome.
All right. So applauding for the consultant doesn't always happen, so thank you all very much for that. I sincerely appreciate that. As Ed said, my name's Mike Cozen. I'm the president of PGAV, and I'll tell you just briefly about us. We're a consulting firm based in St. Louis, Missouri. We have work on several continents around the world and throughout the United States. We work for more than 100 communities in the United States, and our work, appropriately so for this project, has to do both with urban planning and also tourism consulting. And so we were very excited to see this project come forward. But I was also very excited to see this project come forward because I've been coming to this community since 2001. And I've been coming both as a business person doing business here, but also as a tourist. And it is, I brag about this community all the time because of its unique and authentic characteristics. And so when we thought about this process, we wanted to very carefully ground this process in community and we wanted to ground it also in authenticity, the things that we need to be mindful of as we go forward. And you'll see how some of this plays out in my presentation tonight. So as Ed said, this is the TMIP project, Tourism Management and Investment Plan. And by way of introduction of the agenda for tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of this fund, this unique fund called the Tourism Product Development Fund, TPDF. There's another, we got TDA, TMIP, and TPDF. So some acronyms to remember tonight. But also we're going to talk about the goals of this process. And I'm going to transfer it over to Denise Miller from SMARI, and she's going to talk about some community-based research that was done as part of this project. And then I'm going to come back and talk about really the heart of what our phase one work was, which is organized into 4 guiding principles that I'll share with you in a little bit. So just a quick summary of history here related to the TDA and TPDF, the Tourism Development Authority and the Tourism Product Development Fund. The TDA was founded in 1983. It was founded to administer an occupancy tax here, which was gathered from overnight visitors staying in paid lodging here in Buncombe County. In 2001, something I consider very special happened, which was the creation of the Tourism Product Development Fund. At that time, the occupancy tax was 4%. 1% or 25% of the 4% was allocated to the fund. That set in motion some very important things that were really investments in your community, equaling to this point $44 million spread over 39 community-based projects. Of the 44 million, 22 million were projects done by projects that were essentially owned by the city of Asheville. But the range of projects, in case they were actually on the screen as we came in, several of the projects being highlighted, but it included everything from museums to greenways to athletic fields. And I think it's important as a theme, and I'll talk about this more later, how so many of those investments were beneficial for tourists because the governing statutes require it to be beneficial for tourism, but also for residents. And I think the intersection of that is really at the heart of what this process is about. In 2015, the legislation was changed to go from 4% to 6%, and again, the TPDF allocation was still 25%, meaning it grew to 1.5% at that time. And in addition to that, there were some changes made that were making it possible to do major projects, projects that were a little larger, that were funded in part or over longer term by the Tourism Product Development Fund. And that leads us to today. And I guess from my perspective, I want to say to you that the Tourism Product Development Fund is one of the things that I talk about in other communities that we consult with when I talk about good reinvestment models. How do you translate essentially the proceeds from tourism, in this case an occupancy tax, into the community as a reinvestment vehicle? And many of them look at this, they don't have the enabling legislation in the states that they are in, and so they can't just make this happen. And so this is something that I find very admirable and worthy of us continuing to work on. Today we're going to talk about how this fund evolves from here and the use of it to be even more targeted to the community and its benefit. And so this is the journey that we're on, and again, we're just at the beginning of that journey. So this next generation, and Ed, you heard Ed say some of these words here, but the fund had been done as an application-based process. And what I mean by that is the Tourism Product Development Fund Committee reviewed applications that were made by groups, could be governmental, could be private, here in the county for the investments, and they chose which projects to go forward with, so being very reactive in that sense. To be something that is proactive and longer range. In other words, if we could say this fund is going to be here for the next several years, why don't we look out 10 years and figure out, rather than being reactive, how to be proactive to meet the needs of the community and to work it that way. We are operating within what is called the General Assembly's established guidelines. This is the state law that functions to guide how this fund is used. But we're going to be doing a process here, and you've already seen us begin this, that is based in community engagement. that will involve collaboration with public entities that in many cases are looking at public investment projects, both in the city of Asheville and in Buncombe County and in many communities around Buncombe County, as well as other entities, and think about it long term. So our process looks like this. The goals are to bring the community together with the right data and the right resources to develop a framework to guide this long-term thinking and to also better manage the impacts of tourism while maintaining the character and integrity of the region. So 4 phases that you see here, we are here. At the end of phase 1 and really beginning phase 2, next week we'll be back in town to begin meetings that will be embarking in earnest on phase 2, and I'll talk about what all that is. And we will be finished, as Ed said, in spring of next year. So a brief overview of the process related to this, we call phase 1 assessment. We are listening, we are reviewing, we are digging, we are trying to find information. And we're doing that in a variety of ways so we can create this very holistic picture. A lot of public input. There were 3 public input sessions that everyone was invited to, as well as a community input survey that Denise will talk about in a minute here. We had committee meetings with a variety of committees, but also including a steering committee formulated by the Tourism Development Authority. We began our collaboration with potential funding partners, mostly public entities, and we did a lot of data collection. We were looking at more than 40 sources of data and trying to find the best and most accurate and most holistic picture that we possibly can. So the phase we're beginning, phase 2, we call discovery. And I'll get into this a little bit further, but this is really looking at the kinds of projects, frankly, that are already being contemplated within your community. Because one of the things that we believe is true, and we're going to prove this theory as we go forward, is that the projects that are, in fact, already being contemplated have the bones, if you will, of what could be beneficial both to tourism and to the community as well. And we think that in many cases, this fund can be used to be a catalyst for those. So lots of work in the discovery phase to find out what those projects are and understand them in a detailed way. Leading us to phase 3, where we start to work with those entities and others in what we call collaboration. And that is to say, okay, we have this list of projects, we have these strategies, we have this information. How do we take these and really optimize those projects so that they have the most impact? I'm looking forward to finding one project from one entity that's living next door to another project, and if we put them together in a smart way, we can gain a synergy from that. Following that, we'll go into phase 4. We expect to walk into phase 4 with a long list, frankly. And so then the challenge becomes prioritizing. And we do not have a set of, a predetermined set of priorities. We want this process and our community engagement to really determine those priorities, and then that will enable us to prioritize the projects so that they can be put into implementation. The best plans are always geared for implementation, and that is our intent in this case, for sure. So now I get to introduce our partners in this project, Denise Miller with SMARI. Denise?
I am significantly shorter than Mike. Okay, can you all hear me? Did I get those low enough? Okay. And thank you for clapping for the researcher, because that really doesn't happen. So I'm excited. I'm Denise Miller. I'm Executive Vice President with Strategic Marketing and Research Insights, SMARI. We're a market research firm. I've been working there almost 28 years. And what our firm does is research to try to, what we talk about is we bring the voice of the consumer, the resident, the people who aren't always at the table having the discussions. We try to find out what they think and believe and want and bring that to lots of destinations. We work with lots of states, lots of destinations, other kinds of companies. But so that's the whole goal of what we're trying to do, is to let everybody have a say and to understand what they're thinking and what they want. So in this case, for the resident survey, the goal was to gather information about how residents in Buncombe County and Asheville think about tourism, what they see as the positives, what they see as the negatives, where they are, measure their awareness of Explore Asheville, the TDA, what's happening with that, and definitely gather information that would then inform the tourism management investment plan. So we created a survey that was based on a national survey work that we've done, because as Mike said, the whole idea, or I think it was Ed said, the idea of tourism and how much is too much is certainly out there in the world right now. And so we started asking those questions and trying to understand how people feel about it and what makes it feel like enough, not enough, too much. What are some of those issues? And as I said, it was definitely designed to gather both positive and negative issues. Now, I'm not going to go into lots of discussion about survey design. If there are any survey design geeks out there, I'm happy to talk to you because I love that topic, but I don't think that's what you all want to know. But we tried to design the survey very carefully to get honest opinions and to have the information. So for example, you'll see some questions where we actually gave people information about what the TDA does. We didn't do that till the very end of the survey. We made sure that we got people's opinions first and then we gave them information. So we think we got some good, honest information. We also had two different groups that we included in the survey. And you'll see this throughout. One of them we call the random group, and there we went out using information to make sure that our sample was representative of Asheville and Buncombe County. And I'll show you some details and talk about that a little bit. But we wanted to make sure that when you take those results, you can project them on the population and have a good sense that that's how they feel. And so we did 468 surveys, which has an accuracy of plus or minus 5%. So within that range, you can assume those are what the feelings are. But we also wanted to let people have input. And so we opened the survey up and we had over 2,200 people who we call the opt-in sample. So those are people that it was distributed through a whole variety of ways, and anyone who had an opinion was willing to take the survey. We wanted their opinions. We did try to make sure that there weren't a lot of duplicates, so we did a lot of fancy things with device IDs and things to make sure that we had individual people. But again, we have, as you can see, many, many surveys and lots of input from the community. So what did we find out? First of all, and I just want to show a little bit of the demographics of the survey. So the column closest to me shows the random sample, and if you look at that, one of the things we always check to make us feel good about it is we go to census data, and if you look at Buncombe County, the average age is 42 years old. That's the average age of our survey. The average median income is $50,000, which means half the people are below that and half are above that. That's exactly our split. The marital is about 50-some%. So again, we see data that makes us feel very comfortable that this sample is representative of your county. Then I showed the details of the opt-in sample. You can see that's a very different sample. That sample is significantly higher income, significantly older, significantly more likely to be married. So again, that just shows us, when you're looking at the results, helps you understand who those people are. I've then broken out, and I'll show you in a moment, we ask a question about, are you employed somewhere that either receives a great deal of benefit from the tourism industry and visitors, some benefit, or no benefit at all? And so I broke out those demographic profiles, because again, I think it's fairly interesting that when you look at those profiles, they aren't wildly different from the general population. And I think that speaks to the prevalence of tourism in Asheville and Buncombe County. And when we actually look at the respondent profile, we see that breakout in the random sample. The majority of people had some tie through employment to a business that was impacted by tourism. Again, not as much, it was only about half of the opt-in survey, so just showing some of the differences. I do want to note, I think it's been said, but I want to be clear because I'm going to start going through the slides that have tons and tons of numbers. All of these will be available. You can get the full report, you can get this presentation, so please don't feel you have to because there's going to be lots of numbers going by and you don't need to remember them or try to take pictures of them. It will all be available to you because we want you to have this data. Okay, so what did we find out? The first thing that we asked people was, do you believe in general tourism is good for the community? And you can see that basically they do. We have 77% of the people agreed that tourism was good for the community. And when we compare that to the national sample, okay, now my slides are going forward without me doing anything. Ah, of course. So maybe I'll take my head off that. Okay. No, that's not going to stop it. Okay, that could cause us some problems. Okay, I don't know if we have technical help here. Or
It's probably on the timer.
I don't think, maybe it's that. We tried this, of course, earlier, and it did not happen. Okay, is tourism good for the community? 77% of the people agree. 14% disagree. No, that's going to keep going.
It's on the timer. I think the show is on the timer.
Is there a timer on? It is, well, it's now a PDF. Yes, well. Okay, so you can see that generally people in Asheville and Buncombe County do believe that tourism is good for the community and pretty much on par with what we saw in the national result. There were a few more people who were negative, but generally they were positive. Yeah. And then you can see, again, even when we ask the opt-in sample, they generally agree. There's slightly less agreement that tourism is good, but overall, they're positive. Yes. You're just going to sit here and do it for me? Okay. Well, then we also, again, as you might expect, if you're involved in a business that has a benefit from tourism, it's more positive. But again, even among the people who have no tie to tourism through employment, 67% of those people think tourism is good for the community. So from that standpoint, we start out with a very positive attitude. We then ask a whole list of statements, and I'm not, there, I think there were 42 statements that they could agree with. Again, a pretty even mix of positive and negative statements. They could talk about what they felt about tourism. And here, I'm going to highlight some of the ones where there was really strong agreement. So 80% of the people in the random sample felt that tourism helps small businesses, that it supports independent businesses, that you have more restaurants and more independent restaurants because of visitors in tourism, that you've been able to attract more air connections and airlines. There's more independent retail because of tourism, and there's more festival and events. So those were things that, again, very strong agreement across the random sample, that those are benefits that they saw from tourism. Even among the opt-in sample, they saw many of the same benefits, and over 80% agree that it helps small business, helps independent businesses, restaurants. So again, some very positive feelings that we see about tourism. That doesn't mean that everything was positive. And so, again, I want to point out to start with some of the strong negatives where there was, again, perceptions that because of tourism, there were problems. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Nothing like a little, technical difficulty to make the presentation feel good. Okay, so what are some of the negative perceptions that people attribute to tourism? And I don't think any of these will be surprising to you. Over 80% of the people feel that there are problems with parking because of too many visitors, there are traffic problems, and the cost of housing is too high because of people visiting the community. So those are the perceptions. When we look at the opt-in sample, now I'm going backwards. There we go. Okay, interestingly, they agree on parking and traffic, but less than 80% agreed that the cost of housing was too high. But generally, if you get the actual report and look at it, the opt-in sample tended to attribute more negative impacts to tourism across the board. And you'll see some of that, and we'll talk about some of the other statements that we get to. But again, so what we see is tourism is good for the community generally. There's a recognition that there are some very strong positive benefits, but there's also some concerns on the impact of the community from so many visitors. Another question we asked was about how they feel tourism helps showcase the community. So again, over 80% agreed that tourism shows people that my community is a good place to relocate, a good place to retire, and a good place to move their business or start a new business. So again, seeing some positive benefits, and I think we saw that lots of you visited before you came. So that's definitely a way to showcase the community. Even with the opt-in sample, they see those same benefits. 80% say tourism and visitors is a good way to show people it's a good place to relocate and a good place to retire, and even 70% agree that it shows people it's a good place to move their business. So again, some pretty positive feelings. But that doesn't mean everything was positive. So we certainly saw fewer people agreeing on some of the tax benefits. So the tax revenue my community receives from people visiting has gone to build amenities that make this a better place to live. 60% of the random sample agree with that, only 36% of the opt-in. And again, you've seen some of that. We're going to show some of the facilities, but again, they're not recognizing that. That's not a piece of information that's widely known in Asheville and Buncombe County. And the tax revenue my community receives from people visiting has gone to support important community services. Only 54% of the random sample and 27% of the opt-in. So there's where we start to see some disconnect in terms of attitudes and perhaps what's happening. We also see people feeling that perhaps how is their tax money being spent? So my tax dollars are being spent to provide services to visitors rather than spending them on things that are good for residents. 62% of the people, the random sample, agree with that, 75% of the opt-in. So there's this concern that people being here is taking money away from perhaps things they think it should be spent on. And people visiting the area are a drain on city and county resources. So I think that's one of the themes that we see. Yes, tourism is good for the community, but there's some issues that it causes, and perhaps it's taking away resources. And again, the tax revenue my community receives from people visiting reduces the amount of taxes I pay. You got your little handout, you can see that tourism, businesses, and visitors generate lots of taxes that do help support things. But again, there's a disconnect in terms of only 41% of the random sample agree with that statement, which means the majority do not, and only 17% of the opt-in. So again, a disconnect perhaps there. So what's the current situation? Residents believe that tourism is good for the community. Okay, what do I do? Yep, see it starting again. We can, and they see benefits. Thank you. Yes, right there. I really have never had a man at my, on his knee. Really a new feeling. Man, I need this all the time. So they know tourism is good for the community, but they see some issues and they have some concerns. So that's kind of our current situation. So then we want to look at what do they know about the Tourism Authority, Explore Asheville, and how do they feel about tourism promotion. So then we ask them a question about, do you think tax-funded tourism promotion is good for the community? And you can see, again, we still have the majority, 67% of the opt-in sample, over half of 67% of the random sample, over half of the opt-in sample. Again, fairly similar to national results on the random sample. So they do feel you should spend money to promote. This is where we did tell them, did you know that this money, this tax money that we're talking about, is an occupancy tax, so it's generally paid by visitors. Does that make you feel more positive about it? Well, definitely for the random sample, it did. So they went up to 75% who say, well, yes, then I think tourism promotion is good for the community. Interestingly, the opt-in sample, that didn't make a difference. They were pretty much the same. So again, they're about half of them think tourism promotion is good, and about half do not. So what are some of the things they think the Explore Asheville, the tourism entity, does? So these are the things that generally people agreed with, and it was interesting, in this case, the random sample and the opt-in sample are very similar. They believe that some of the major things we think, attracting tourism, bringing them to help support the community, those are things that Explore Asheville does and should do. If we look at some of the other things, we put a whole variety of things in here that different destination organizations do, like should you attract people to visit and support jobs, attracting international travelers, bringing conventions, attracting businesses to relocate, a variety of those things. There we have a more mixed bag, you know, somewhere between under half, under 40%, and between a quarter think those are the role of Explore Asheville. And then we get the final tier of things. These are things that fewer people thought was the role of Explore Asheville. And I think the most interesting thing here is the top two, because that's where you see a fairly significant difference between the random sample and the opt-in sample. So generally, still in either case, the majority of people don't choose this, but providing funds for development of new community facilities and services and addressing infrastructure issues in the community are not necessarily things that they currently think of as the role of Explore Asheville. The opt-in sample are more likely to say that's the role and want that to be the role, but currently, again, I think there's some disconnect in terms of potentially, as you'll see, knowing what's already happening. So, as I said at the end of the survey, then once we had asked a lot of the other questions, we said, okay, so this fund has been out there funding projects, and here's a whole list of projects. How many of these were you aware were funded through the Tourism Development Authority? Well, from the random sample, 41% of the people didn't know of any of them, and you can see the percentages are pretty small. So at most, people maybe knew about one or two generally. In the opt-in sample, a few more people knew about it, but again, still, there were 31% who didn't know of any of these projects. So there's definitely a lack of awareness in terms of the money being spent for this purpose. And then we did ask, well, when you know that this money went to support these facilities, does it make you feel more positive about the tourism fund? And the opt-in sample, and the random sample, 48% said yes, and in the opt-in sample, over 40%. So again, that's a piece of information that when people have, they have a different opinion and makes a difference. So given all that, then you can look in terms of what did they say about some of these statements that we had about why you would promote or would not promote. They do understand that money to promote tourism fuels the local economy. So again, even among the opt-in sample, they understand that. So it's kind of interesting, if you believe that this money for promotion fuels the economy, then it would seem that it's important that you would want to do it. And again, but the next one is kind of interesting, because for the random sample, I think it's a good use of lodging tax money to promote tourism. So again, the random sample, they overwhelmingly agree with that, but the opt-in sample does not. Again, what seems to be the issue here is if you feel there's too many tourists, then you don't want to promote. So that seems to be what the issue is with the opt-in sample, that they're suffering some of those issues of over-tourism, and so they're not sure they want to bring more people in. So also interesting, my community's tourism office spends money responsibly. Given that there was, obviously they didn't know a lot of what's happening, still 2/3 of the people felt that was true. So that's, I think, a very positive finding. There are, again, we put in some statements that would suggest you don't want continued tourism promotion. When the community spends money to promote tourism, it is only helping businesses that should be doing their own marketing. Again, the majority don't agree with that, but pretty significant numbers have some of that opinion, so that's interesting. Using tax dollars to promote tourism is wasteful. Again, not the majority on the random sample, but a significant number, so that's worth knowing. And my community should stop spending money to promote tourism and bring visitors to the area again. That's again an interesting one where over half of the opt-in sample, the people who have a strong opinion say that, but if you look at the random sample representative of the community, it's much, much smaller. So again, that's not what generally people feel, but there are some people who strongly have that attitude. The last part I'm going to talk about is the tourism management investment plan. So we asked people, we gave them a whole list of issues and said, which of these would you like to see addressed in this plan? And here's in the random sample, you can see it started with parking, 61%, housing affordability, city cleanliness, homelessness and panhandling, better sidewalks, making the city more walkable. So you can kind of say these were the top tier of things. Over 40% of the people suggested that these are issues that should be addressed in the plan. We kind of had a next tier of issues: workforce affordability, walking trails, arts and culture, maintaining parks and sports venues. Again, at least 20% mentioned these items, but significantly smaller numbers. And then we had a final list that were things that people were under 20%, so very few people mentioned. Signage, more in different restaurants, sports facilities and entertainment facilities, renovating additional arts businesses and events. So again, this is information that will go to help inform the plan because it helps understand some of the priorities as you go forward. When we look at the differences between the random and the opt-in sample, there were some differences. It was kind of interesting that the opt-in sample, the things they wanted addressed were better sidewalks and walkability, transportation, and parking. So a slightly different list. And again, if some of their issue is over-tourism, those seem more focused on that specifically, that they find it hard to get around and find a place to park, so that's what they want you to address in the plan. Kind of interesting. So again, just to kind of summarize before we go forward, the majority of residents do feel that tourism is good for the community. They do support additional promotion of tourists in the community. They see lots of benefits, but they have some specific concerns that they'd like to see addressed. Their knowledge of the TDA and Explore Asheville is actually fairly limited, and few are familiar with a lot of the facilities that have already been supported by the fund, and increasing awareness of that does make people feel better and more positive. But they've also identified a wide range of issues that they want to see in the plan that can help as you develop this plan further going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Denise. And I'm going to take my life into my hands and see if I can make this thing work. So that was an excellent summary of a lot of the findings that we found in the formal online survey tool. As I mentioned, there was also there were 3 community input workshops where we worked collaboratively to gain information that largely was echoed as what we heard just a minute ago. So what I'm going to do now is go through a few slides here. And I think it's fair to say that my main goal in this is probably to whet your appetite to dig a little deeper, because we're going to be offering an online document that will include Denise's full survey information, but also the full findings that we have put together for phase 1. And it's a very dense and big document, but you're going to get kind of the high level here, as someone said, the tops of the trees, you know, as we're here headed into fall. And it's going to be organized around these four themes, 4 guiding principles. And you'll see how these play out as I talk, and how they're influencing our thinking about the plan as it stands, but also as it goes forward. So as I mentioned before, one of my favorite aspects and one of the things that I cherish about this community is its particular sense of authenticity. And so number 1 was to protect and celebrate that. And so we have to put a good bead on what comprises that sense of authenticity. Number 2 is to harness the benefits and manage growth. Number 3 is to embrace collaboration and partnership. And number 4 is to encourage and create connectivity. And you'll see how these things play out, because so many of these things that are impacts of tourism, both perceived and real, are influencing how these things might be addressed going forward. So I'm going to do it that way. And you don't have to kneel. So we'll see if we can make that work. So number one, protect and celebrate authenticity. Some of the things that you'll see in the report relate to the 4 subjects that are there. Food and beverage, both makers and establishments. Retail, both merchants and makers, merchants and studios. Arts and culture, and the natural environment that is so much a part of what you are here. Go forward into this one. So data is important in a situation like this, and it's important not just because of what the numbers are, but what they tell us. And I think one of the things that we found in the data that was helpful was to understand and try to quantify a way that we can understand the unique ecosystem of independent operators and creative entrepreneurs that exist in this community. And probably one of the best examples of that is in the food and beverage category. And we looked at this in a number of ways. This is sort of a simple one, but Wake County, which is Raleigh, has essentially one restaurant for 560 residents, whereas here in Buncombe County you have one restaurant for every 394. What does that mean? That means that you have a higher percentage of restaurants that serve this community or are available to you. And I think that it's true. I think we were looking at the Buxton Hall barbecue yesterday and enjoying that, and Vortex Donuts today. I think so many of these are really great examples of what makes this community special, which is that creativity and that sense of creative and independent entrepreneurship. Another way that we look at this is with retail. And again, these are numbers, but I think that they're really talking about this ecosystem. When we would look at a community of the size of Buncombe County, we would see a demand, and that is based on averages of about $3 billion a year in retail sales. But in reality, your supply or your actual sales are nearly $4 billion. And we think that that surplus, if you will, that amount above and beyond, which is fueled by tourism, and it takes you and creates opportunities for both residents and tourists that would not exist were it not for the tourism activity that is created and the spending that tourists and visitors in fact create. Arts and culture is another important category here. You know, one of the things that came up in so many of our public input sessions here is this wonderful diversity of performers, and it's both local performers, people who live in this community, but also the ones who visit your community. And I think it's a source of pride, frankly, that many acts that might not otherwise come to a community of this size choose to come here and play in venues that they might not normally play in oftentimes because they enjoy coming here. So it's part of your authentic characteristics that they find this a great place for their creativity to be displayed. What does that mean from a resident perspective? When we compare residents of Buncombe County based on census data and other data like this, we find that residents here are more likely to attend performances that are musical of various kinds, but also to play instruments, and also to do other creative activities like drawing, woodworking, this kind of thing. So you are a place that attracts visitors who like these things, but you are also a place that has residents that like these things in a higher proportion than most places in the United States. We find that to be a key part of your authentic characteristics. So natural environment, no surprise, it has come up a lot in visitor surveys and resident surveys that your identity as a green community is an important part, this unique outdoor setting that you have here. And again, we find that residents participate in these kinds of activities at a much higher rate than other parts of the United States. People come here because they're attracted to it or because perhaps this kind of environment inspires them to participate. And with that comes concerns, obviously. And when you see one of these little symbols that look like people talking, that's community input. But residents are concerned about the impacts on environment and want to see projects that are supporting the green ecosystem here, such as preservation projects, green spaces, green ways, river stream conservation, things like this. So these are good clues for us going forward in terms of looking for priorities and looking for things that we think residents see as important. So the second one of these categories I mentioned here is harness the benefits and manage the growth. And here you're going to see that we look at the role that the tourism industry plays in the local economy. We're going to talk about the role of certain elements of the local economy, such as lodging. We're going to talk about traffic and parking, many different aspects of this. So tourism employment. 15% of employment in Buncombe County is supported by visitor spending. That's 1 in 7 jobs. Wage growth. So 5,000 visitor-related or visitor-supported jobs have been created in the last 5 years. Hospitality and healthcare are actually the only sectors in Buncombe County that pay higher than the state average here. And wages in Buncombe County hotels are 19% higher than the state average. That's really created by demand, by the number of workers that are needed in this part of the industry, and obviously demand creates higher wages. You have an economy here that is robust in many respects, but when we zero in on visitor spending, this is cash and cash registers, if you will, it falls into many different categories. Food and beverage, lodging, retail, recreation and entertainment, and transportation. The largest of these is food and beverage. Perhaps not surprisingly, based on the slide that I showed you a little bit ago about the restaurant industry here. Lodging is number 2, and retail closely behind in number 3. And a similar look at the food industry as I showed you with the retail industry. It says food and retail, it's actually food. But the demand based on your visitor population, 311 million, the actual supply spending is $500 million. So again, you have a surplus here that represents the amount of additional spending that tourists provide, which then fuels this creative ecosystem that I mentioned in terms of food businesses. Population growth and also visitor growth. So these are 2 factors that will play heavily into our thinking going forward here. And you see that population growth based on the census has gone from 238,000 in 2010 to 266, and is projected to continue on to 2023 to be 284,000 in Buncombe County. From 2013 to 2017, overnight visitation, only overnight, grew from 3.2 to 3.9. So we have growth both in local residents and in overnight visitors as well. So one of the things that's hard to put a beat on that we really want to focus on here is the effect that people who are in the county, either as residents or workers commuting to the county, or overnight visitors or day visitors to the county have. And so if I take the actual population of Buncombe County, 257,000 on the left-hand side, the green dot. Workers commuting to the county, 45,000. These are people who live outside the county who are coming into the county on a daily, at least workday basis to do their jobs. Overnight visitors, 3.9, and day visitors to 7.3. So that would look to be something that very heavily shows that visitors are having a huge impact. But I think we have to square this up with the fact that the visitors here are not here every day. And in fact, when we do that calculation and we say, for instance, that the 257,000 residents of the county are here essentially through the year, we have that size of a pie, but roughly 3/4 of the total. Workers commuting to the county, about 9%. Overnight visitors who are here on the average of about 3 days each for about 9% as well, and day visitors about 6%. So we're talking about infrastructure. And we're talking about things like impact on roads, and we're talking about all these kinds of things that we have to measure going forward when we talk about infrastructure investment. So I think we have to put a proper context on all of this to understand the effect of people in the county and what they mean. Traffic has come up a lot, and it is a big issue. And there is no doubt that in many parts of the county that you have been impacted by traffic, and in particular in certain areas. So we looked carefully at data that was provided by state and local sources, and we found that, for instance, that over the past few years that vehicular traffic has grown faster on your interstate highways and on some suburban streets actually than downtown. And in addition to that, some downtown streets have actually seen a decline, according to these statistics, in vehicular traffic. So it is, I guess the essential part of this is that it has not been a consistent kind of growth. So we want to be careful not to say that it's all grown. We want to find the areas where it has grown, and then we can talk about what to do about that. But there's also elements of this that we want to address from the standpoint of community input, showing strong support for things like improved bicycle and pedestrian access. Sometimes we think that the solutions aren't always about vehicles, but they're about helping people do things other than their personal vehicles. 72% of residents believe that there are parking and traffic issues because of visitors coming to Buncombe County, and it's true. It's also true that it has been impacted by population growth. And one of the things we're going to look at really carefully related to downtown is what is the parking situation downtown and how do we improve it? So about 12,000 parking spaces exist in downtown Asheville today. And of them, 700 are metered spaces and 2,300 are in publicly owned decks. And so the balance of that, the roughly 9,000 spaces, are private. And the 9,000 spaces that are private are not, we believe, fully utilized in ways that can be supportive of both residents and the tourism population that comes here. So we think a more comprehensive approach to management is important. You'll see in our report that there are a lot of examples that we've drawn from other communities, and I would encourage you all to look at this. For instance, a parking management solution that San Francisco has implemented that we might study as an element of the solution going forward here. So understanding the need and understanding the situation is part of what we're looking at, and also looking at other places for inspiration as well. Streetscapes and sidewalks. So both residents and visitors expressed a desire for improved sidewalks. I was on the South Slope today and realizing that a lot of the areas I might walk to from one place to another are not well served by sidewalks. So making the community more walkable inherently, expanding walking trails and bike paths are all part of this, we think. You have already started some of these kinds of projects in your community here, and we're excited about that because you've already been showing ways that this community can use these kinds of urban design principles in a better way. And so going forward, we're going to be looking very carefully at this, and I'll get further into why that's important, especially in more congested areas like downtown. So lodging trends. You know, lodging has been a big subject lately. Lodging has been changing over time, and for sure demand has grown. One of the things about demand growing is it has grown to be more year-round. And so the strongest growth in recent years for lodging has actually occurred during the winter seasons when many destinations frankly really struggle to bring visitors to their community, and as well as at weekday stays versus weekend stays. And so one of the things that's important about that is that year-round occupancy helps sustain year-round employment and creates opportunities for building a profession in the lodging industry. This is a slide that speaks to actually the change in supply for hotels over the past few years, basically fiscal year 15 through 19. And I'm not going to get into a great deal of detail with this. Essentially, it has grown about 16% net over the past 5 years. And I think one of the things that I want to make sure we point out is that the yellow bars that actually go below the line are areas where lodging inventory has actually fallen off the list. It no longer remains on the list. So when we look at added rooms, we also look at rooms that have been taken away in that lodging inventory. So for instance, in 2019, 398 rooms were added, 297 were removed from the list, so about 100 were added as a net value for that. So as occupancy, or as supply has increased, it was basically absorbed, which is, essentially a good thing from the standpoint of we're not overbuilding hotel rooms. We're doing this in a sustainable way. In the past year, basically from fiscal year 18 to 19, it's grown a little bit, about 1.5% here, but it's been pretty stable at the mid-70s for some time, which I think is a healthy and robust lodging economy. Another thing that we measure, and those of you in the lodging industry know these numbers very well, but RevPAR is revenue per available room, and ADR is the daily rate, and the average daily rate. And it has increased, but that has been slowing, and we think that represents more inventory coming online. So those numbers again reflect kind of the state of the industry. And this is one of the things that I think is also important to keep in mind related to this. The single fastest growing part of your lodging industry here is what are called short-term rentals. And so this is Airbnb, this is VRBO, this is HomeAway. These are things that have been growing, and essentially from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 19, the room nights booked in short-term rentals in Buncombe County increased 38%. And the data is getting better about this. Actually, it has been, in the earlier years, I should tell you that in fiscal year 16 and 17, not all those categories, I think VRBO have been added in more recent years. And so we're getting better data about this, but if anything, it's showing that this is a fast-growing section of your lodging industry here. In fact, growing much, much faster than actual hotel rooms that are being added to the overall lodging mix. So, number 3 is embrace collaboration and partnership. As I mentioned before, one of the essential elements of this project is to not just have the Tourism Product Development Fund act alone, but to act with partners to create a higher level of impact where possible in this. And so it can be a catalyst for collaboration with all kinds of partners, both public and private. So just a quick summary, as I said before, the occupancy tax at 6% applied on paid lodging. 25% of the occupancy tax revenue is allocated currently to the Tourism Product Development Fund. So in fiscal year 2019, $6.4 million was generated for the Tourism Product Development Fund. So that number has been growing both as the tourism, or as the lodging economy has grown, the number of paid overnight visitors, as well as the increase in the percentage. So combined, that number has grown, and it has made that fund more effective and give it more opportunity to do well. So we have begun the conversations with both the city of Asheville, the county, and some of the other communities in the county. And as an example, the city of Asheville has identified capital projects totaling $390 million, and not all of them are tourism related. $60 million in the current capital improvement plan, so there's 330 in additional, you could say, requests or at least identified project needs. Buncombe County and other entities also have projects, including greenway construction and sports facilities, other kinds of things like that. So we're trying to work with these entities to really create a very detailed and robust list of all of this. As Denise mentioned, community sentiment is going to play a key role in how we shape this. And just to remind you of some of the things that came up in the SMARI survey, prioritizing these projects here that could be addressed by tourism management, the Tourism Management Investment Plan. Top areas include housing affordability, parking, public safety and policing issues, transportation, sidewalks, and infrastructure. So the key here will be to find the projects that can be supported under the current guidelines to be addressed within this. And the fourth section of this is encourage and create connectivity, both within downtown and surrounding areas, and really across your region. So this is a heat map that was generated using mobile data for the year 2018 in downtown Asheville. And the patterns associated with that are not surprising. So these are overnight visitors. We're capturing their data signal in downtown Asheville, and it's showing basically where they spend their time. And so it's important to recognize the areas that are darker in color, and it's also important to recognize the areas that are not. So for instance, substantial parts of the South Slope are not very dark right now because overnight visitors are not tending to go there in the quantity that they might. How can we connect them to other places in Buncombe County? One of the things we want to talk about is walking. And we want to inspire your visitors to park and walk more. Having the idea of a parking space that's right exactly near the place I want to go versus parking and having a realization that so much is available to us. So what we did is create a map of downtown that has a number of points like the Cellular Center, Pack Square, the Orange Peel, South Slope, and McCormick Field. And the darker areas are basically a 5-minute walk at a reasonable pace, and the lighter blue areas are a 10-minute walk. And so most of downtown, and in fact even beyond downtown, is an extraordinarily walkable place. And I think sometimes walkability is not affected as much by distance as it is the place you walk, the environment, the experience of walking If it's on a sidewalk that's not very accommodating, or perhaps no sidewalk at all, that tends to become a deterrent for the ease of walking and the experience of walking. We want to have that be something that conduces dispersion of visitors throughout downtown and other areas within the county. Another example of this connectivity concept is involving greenways, and you've already embarked on a great series of greenways. It's something that I think is fantastic here, and it's connecting Asheville and other communities in Buncombe County. There's actually a plan for 102 miles of greenways, 31 of which are currently in Asheville, and I think that greenways have already been funded by the TPDF projects. This is something that we certainly can look towards as we start to prioritize these things, and we've heard it come up again in many of the visitor surveys. So again, this is a summation of those principles, and at the bottom, the URL, ashevillecdb.com/tmip. And this is where you can find the report online. I would encourage everyone here tonight to take a look at that report. I think it's a pretty easy read, and we pepper with all this data a lot of really interesting examples from around the United States of people, of strategies that have been used to promote and manage tourism. So please take the time to go there. And again, just a summary of where we're going next in our project, phase 2, headed into the discovery phase, where we're going to be looking with partners at the many important projects that are out there and how we can influence those projects and make them better. And with that, I think we're on to the next step. All right, thank you very much.
Again, I want to thank Mike and Denise for their presentation, for the information and the data they've given us. Thank those of you in the audience who participated in those surveys, in the open meetings, in the workshops, the stakeholder meetings. Your input has been critical for this process, so thank you. I appreciate it. Now, based on public input from the project teams received throughout the surveys, the workshops, the stakeholder meetings, and the resident stakeholder meetings, there's a number of topics that have come up and questions that I'd like to invite panelists to join me up here so we can answer those. To join me up here, Himanshu Kabir, Asheville hotelier and vice chair of the Buncombe County TDA. Kevin Frazier, an Asheville native, historian, educator, and business owner. Stephanie Brown, the president and CEO of Explore Asheville Convention and Visitor Bureau. And I'd like Mike to come back up and join us as well. President of the event. And I'm going to move over here and sit down. So thank you all for joining us up here. A couple of questions. First, selfishly, because I have a microphone and I can do this, I'm going to ask my questions because I have a couple. Again, we've mentioned it. There's been a lot of national and international news about this over-tourism piece, and I certainly witnessed that in Barcelona. There's people that think we are over-tourismed here in Asheville, if that's a word. As an urban planner, Mike, I want to ask you, what would you say about Asheville and its capacity? Have we reached it? Are we past it? Are we in that place? And I know we've all got different opinions. Certainly, the last person who moved here would agree it's time to lock the doors and don't let anybody else in, right? I said it 14 years ago. I'm not ashamed. I'll admit it. You know. But how many of you have come in the last 14 years? Sorry, you shouldn't be here. No, maybe that's not fair. So, have we reached that point of over-tourism?
Thanks, Ed. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah, it's a big question, and certainly it's been in the news lately, and we have seen this. We work with World Heritage sites around the world where indeed the actual fabric of an important place in the world that is historic is being threatened by being overrun with tourists. And so there are plenty of examples of that. The United Nations also defines over-tourism by, its impacts on the quality of life of residents rather. So it's something to pay attention to. The thing that I would say about the over-tourism concept is that is by and large a subjective concept right now. In other words, there isn't a uniform standard of how you measure it, and that's what makes a project like this challenging in a way. Is we can't rely on a broad concept like over-tourism, as important as it is, and we have to drill in and understand when we talk about traffic, what the impacts of traffic are. When we talk about parking, what's the impact of parking? And we have to strike that balance. So your question has to do with, did the scale tip over the side? I think our tendency is to think no, but I think we have to be very careful going forward in this community, and we have to come up with proactive initiatives for how we address that. Tourism management is something that many communities in the United States are just beginning to understand. I think you have a tool available to you here, the Tourism Product Development Fund, that most communities don't have. And so it enables you to look proactively at the situation and build on a strength, which is your tourism industry, but to do it in a way that is perhaps more intentionally for the benefit of residents. And I think that is how we should look at this and solving the problem moving forward.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. And as we saw from some of the survey results, the sentiment of folks that there's people that really understand the benefit of tourism, and there's others that really don't see a benefit of tourism. And so, Stephanie, my next question really is for you. Why is the Buncombe County TDA embarking on this project to change how the funding and whatnot from the Tourism Product Development Fund is actually being used?
Well, first of all, I'd like to just say up front that we recognize that there are impacts to the community from tourism that are negative for the people who live here. And it's a kind of a cornerstone of this approach to recognize that occupancy tax funds through the Tourism Product Development Fund are available to help ease those challenges. And so by embarking on this approach, the application-based process is easier and faster. And it's been really successful in the past at funding a wide variety of projects that not only have helped increase tourism, but more importantly are enjoyed by the people who live here. But we've been hearing from residents for a long time that tourism is impacting infrastructure and creating quality of life issues. And so the TDA has had a stated interest for the last several years in investing in infrastructure. And in fact, I think the survey especially highlights that it's really not very well known that the Tourism Product Development Fund has invested occupancy tax dollars in infrastructure, most significantly in improvements in the River Arts District at $7.1 million. But the application-based process has not yielded applications to address downtown infrastructure and some other facilities for a couple of reasons. One is it's complicated, to do that planning in a way that aligns with an application-based process. And so through this process, we take an opportunity to collaborate with city and county partners to identify planning that both manages tourism and makes these long-term investments. So this approach differs in three really important ways that we've touched on before. One is by inviting the community to help prioritize both the challenges and the opportunities that can be addressed through this source of funding. Secondly, it creates a pathway for collaboration with public entities to solve problems, work together to synergize these opportunities, but also to address these problems in a management-oriented kind of way. And that's one reason we're so excited to bring PGAV onto this team. But thirdly now, as you noted earlier, the fund is $6.5 million a year. And so that especially gives us an opportunity to look further out, to combine 10 years of funding, maybe more, so that more monumental needs can be addressed and solved.
Good. It sounds like a smart approach to look at it from a long-term perspective than what just somebody's asking for this year. Yeah. Good. So let me get to some of the questions that we heard through the public workshops and other community input that we received. And Kevin, this is one I'm going to direct to you. The question was, and I'm reading verbatim, quote, "Why do y'all keep saying that tourism benefits residents? Seems like the only people it benefits is hotel owners. For everyone else, it's only causing headache and frustration."
Well, good evening, neighbors. So I grew up in Asheville. I am actually a 13th generation Buncombe County resident from a family of dairy farmers. And so I've seen a lot of changes with that. I think about, when you're asking that question, I think about what my Saturday is planned to be. So Saturday morning, I'm going to do what I do almost every Saturday morning, and I go to the downtown city market on Market Street. And I visit my friends who own those farms, own the bakeries. Okay, maybe I stop at a couple of bakeries, shop tents along the way, and pick up great things to have that weekend for the rest of the week. But the reality is, my neighbors and me, we are not going to pay the bills for the farmers from going to the market, even from April to November. We're the extra money. The real money for the farmers comes from the restaurants and that they support. That's where the majority of the produce goes, and that's what pays the bills. And then we get to have, I get to benefit because other places are needing that food, and I get part of that too. I've got to go get a gift on Saturday afternoon, and so I'm gonna go visit a friend of mine who's got one of the studios down in River Arts, and her and I have talked about this many times. I've said, how as an artist, what do you feel about tourism? And she said, well, thank God for the tourists, because they buy my stuff. She said, I love my Asheville customers, but the reality is the majority of folks buying art and craft in Asheville are folks who are buying as a memento of their time in Asheville. That's what a lot of us do when we go visit different places. And then I'm going to a concert on Saturday night at the Orange Pill, a very quirky performer that some friends and I are interested in. And in conversations over the years with Liz Whalen that books most of those in, they do this in a plan of knowing that there's going to be some folks come up from Greenville to those shows, some folks come over from Knoxville, and they pick names that will draw folks that are part of those not just overnight, but the day coming up for an evening show. And so I think that when we look at that, and we've seen a lot of data today, we're really fortunate in Asheville in that one of the benefits we get out of tourism is we get access to food, beverage, art, music, retail that frankly cities our size don't get that access to. And so my main job is I work for Western Carolina University. I work at our satellite campus down in South Asheville, but I also own a couple of businesses or I'm part of it. One is a walking tour company, and we're completely reliant on tourism. It's a small little company, and we do art and history, architecture tours around town. And then I'm one of the owners of Well Played, the cafe on Wall Street that's centered around board game play. We've got about 700 board games, folks come and play and eat and drink. And during the week, I would definitely have mostly locals. On Saturday, if I go check in on Saturday afternoon, I might have about 60 or 65% that day, maybe even 70, will be folks who come to visit. We couldn't survive. There's just not enough. Of all the, the one restaurant for 394 folks, 50% of every restaurant's business in Asheville is from outside folks. And so we just couldn't operate without that. We'd only have half of that. So that becomes, at least in terms that, it's not all about the hoteliers at all. People don't come to Asheville to go to a hotel. They just don't. They come to do cool stuff, and they happen to stay in a hotel because they're here for a couple of nights. They've just been a visible symbol as we're trying to figure out how we work our economy.
Thank you. And I wonder, I was trying to remember the exact statistic you had up there with the restaurants per capita from us and Wake. It was about a third difference, wasn't it? So you think about your favorite restaurants, which one would you cancel? Tick your top three, and which one would not be here if we didn't have the tourists coming? And that's kind of heartbreaking to think about. There's a question that came up here that really is all about hotels, so Amancha, I think it's probably a good one to direct to you. Why does Asheville want so many hotels? Most of them are national brands and not local. It must be nice to be a hotel owner these days. I've even heard that the TDA pays for hotels to be built here. It's a verbatim quote.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you, Ed. And I think I have you and you beat on applause for a hotelier in this town. I'm joking. No, I'm serious. So, just a few points there. First of all, I did a quick survey of all the hotel properties that are in Buncombe County, and according to my calculation and knowing the market for a long time, about 76% of actual hotels are owned by people that live in the city of the Buncombe County. So the notion that majority of the hotels are not owned by people that live here is incorrect. Second, the 25 or 24% that's left, they employ people that live here, that work here, that pay taxes here, that they buy here, shop here. So yes, some small percentage of hotels are owned by outside companies, but they are still investing heavily in our economy. The TDA does not pay anybody any money to come to hotels here. As a matter of fact, if there is a one-year moratorium on hotels in the city of Asheville, and my feeling is that when the guidelines come out for what it will cost to build a hotel in Asheville, what we'll have, the cost to build a hotel in Asheville will significantly increase as we come out of the one-year process, and that's what I'm assuming. So can you just repeat the other question as well, please?
Yeah, it was, why does Asheville want so many hotels? Most of them are national brands, not local. Must be nice to be a hotel owner these days. I've even heard that the TDA pays for hotels.
So yeah, so on the national brands, yes, they're national brands. So when we have Holiday Inn, it's a franchise from Intercontinental Hotels Group, IHG, or a Marriott franchise, and we pay them a flat franchise fee for using their name and branding and the reservation system. But we own the hotel, we own the property. We renovate the hotels every 7 years or so. We use local contractors, we use local plumbers, local suppliers to do all the work that's needed to do in our hotels. So it is not all corporate owned or corporate managed or anything like that. I can't sit here and tell you it's not good to be a hotel owner in this town, okay? Our family has been here for 47 years, I'm sorry. My father-in-law came here in the early 80s, bought his first hotel here in Asheville, and from that we've grown to 4 right here in Buncombe County. We've bought 2 existing hotels and built one. We're in the process of building the 5th one. So yes, so I can't sit here and tell you it's not, it's not good. But at the same time, there is a balance, okay? When we see these exciting numbers and high ADRs, it's not the case in the whole county. Most of our hotels are outside of the central business district. They are in the outlying, right on the county and city lines, for example, still in the city of Asheville. But we don't, we're seeing negative trends going in, and that's okay, because that's what happens when demand goes up, when supply goes up. But the challenge that we have, I think, is the short-term rentals, and I'm not against short-term rentals, or if somebody's renting if they're a legal short-term rental, that's great, that's perfect. But you talk about money going out of our community, it's companies like Airbnb, companies like VRBO that charge a lot of fees that our local residents actually keep less of the money. A lot of money goes back out to those corporations. To me, that's why they have a lobbying person at the city of Asheville to come lobby to make sure that they're favorable towards short-term rentals. There's a reason for that. So I think the demand for hotels is there, and it's a good thing, as you can see with all the presentations we've seen so far. But most of the money, most of everything stays here in town.
So I've got another really hot one for you. Since you're in the hot seat, we might as well turn it up a little. This one is, quote, "We understand that the occupancy tax was established by state law, which mandates how it's spent. Is the Buncombe County TDA considering going to Raleigh to make changes to that law?"
So I'm speaking for all hoteliers here. So, yes, as we all know, 1983, the hoteliers got together and said we need to have occupancy tax to really just help the economy, not the hotels. That's a secondary. As you can see from the numbers, the hotels do benefit, but it is a secondary benefit. It's more the economic driver for the community to have tourists here, to use our facilities, to do things, to buy things. So, I'm going to put my TDA hat here, 100% right now, and that one, when I sit on the TDA, it is my responsibility to make sure that that board directs the staff and the funds to be spent in the way that is legislated by the state law. So I am not going to sit here and tell you that as a TDA, but after looking at data, and this is great information, but at the same time, we all agree, and I think we all know, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, that we have some impacts of tourism in our community. Okay, the scale of those things you might differ. It depends on who you ask. They might agree, might disagree. But I live here. I raised my family here. I feel traffic, but that has nothing to do with tourism. It's on Henderson Mill Road, and people are going home. It has nothing to do with overgrowth of hotels in those areas, but it has to do with the fact that we are growing. At the same time, I've gone downtown sometimes and gotten frustrated because I can't find a parking spot and I have to walk maybe 3 or 4 blocks. But recognizing that we have the opportunity at this point in time, and the TDA and the hoteliers and occupancy tax, basically people that collect the occupancy tax or generate the tax, I think there is consensus. I think there is a move that we could go and look at the guidelines and see if we can maximize the Tourism Product Development Fund and see if we can see how we can help mitigate some of the issues that are coming up with tourism, whether it's maintenance, whether it's infrastructure. And that infrastructure word is such a wide word that you know, if you ask me, it's a different thing versus asking somebody else. So, but you know, thanks to what the PGAV group is doing, and if you can define those, talk to the city, talk to the county, and we can actually move the needle on some of those things, I think that's a good thing. The things like affordable housing that are completely out of our wheelhouse here, and it is an issue, right? Let's all be honest. It is. Affordability of workforce housing is. We hear about it all the time. Can the hotelier sit here and say we can fix that? We cannot do that. That's just not any way possible. I always go back to the Energy Innovation Task Force. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the county, the city, the public utility, which is Duke Energy, they got together and a bunch of nonprofits, business owners. I was included in those meetings, in the Energy Innovation Task Force meetings. And about 3 years ago or so, they set out a goal of 2 things: 1, reducing electric usage, and 2, not having Duke Energy to build a 3rd peaker plant over in South Asheville. And a lot of skeptical people in that room in the first couple of meetings. But towards the end, I think last year, or I think this year, middle of this year, Duke has basically said they're not going to build a 3rd peaker plant, right? Because we were able to move the needle and show them that we are doing what needs to be done to bring down consumption of energy. Even though our population is going to grow, we don't need them to put a peaker plant. But the point of that is that kind of approach is needed for housing, in my opinion. And we need to get all the players at the table. It can't be just tourism's fault, or tourism needs to fix this, or hotels need to fix this. But it needs to be a community effort. It needs for-profits, not-for-profits. You need the city, the county, all need to be at a table and significantly make a change into that. So that's where.
And it was my understanding, and the part of the.
Go right ahead. Don't tell me don't get enough applause anyway.
My understanding with the strategic change in how the funding from the development fund is being used, that's the purpose of this project. And that, just 4 phases, Mike, is that really we want to be more strategic. We want to be more like the Energy and Innovation Task Force. So, I think that's, as you see, that's where this project is moving. Stephanie, I've got one that came in that I want to throw back to you is, why do we keep promoting visitation to Asheville? We don't need more tourists, we need less.
Thank you for that easy question. This is a perception that I'm happy to address because, just to put it in a nutshell, less tourism is less a lot of other things, including jobs, customers that sustain local businesses, and that generate tax revenues that are necessary for our community to thrive. And it's hard for us to imagine now that it wasn't that long ago that things closed in the winter. I mean, how many of you remember when Grove Park Inn closed, Biltmore closed, lots of restaurants closed? Those were workers that did not get paid in the winter. And we don't have that problem anymore, and a lot of tourism places still have that reality. Lots of beaches and lots of destinations are booming in the summer, and people are out of work in the winter. So tourism allows people in Asheville and Buncombe County, to make their money year round. And the marketing that we do sustains all kinds of businesses. I think probably one of the biggest misperceptions is that the work that we do and the investments that we made really only benefit lodging properties. But the thing that I love most about my job, and I'm going to say this is true for everybody at Explore Asheville, is the scope of businesses that we work with and that we support by connecting them to customers, whether it's a business like Kevin's or it's artists and tour companies of all different kinds and outfitters and entertainment venues, and the list goes on and on of entrepreneurs, and they're getting to do what they want to do. That whatever business was their dream to have, and they're employing people in this community who like what they do and are doing what they want to do. And so all of these businesses are depending on a base of customers, and all of them want to continue to grow. And so when people say I want less tourism, I have to ask which businesses do you not want to exist, and who gets to choose, and how many fewer dollars do you want available through facilities through this fund. At the same time, we have to manage that growth, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight, to spend the rest of this year on, so that we can invest these occupancy tax resources in a way that manages that growth while we continue to take the benefits of people coming here to spend their money.
Thanks, and that kind of leads me to the last question as well, and Kevin, I want to direct it to you as a native, because I think sometimes it's easy especially for those of us who've come later to this great place, we forget maybe what it was. And there's a lot of cities in this nation who are in an opposite place. Folks in the Rust Belt who are trying to figure out how do we get anybody to come here so we can have taxes to actually fix the school or do things like that. So yes, there's problems and some issues with tourism, and we could be a lot worse off. So Kevin, this one for you is in terms of how does it feel from a native standpoint, from growing up here? What was it like growing up here? What was Asheville? You do this great history presentation, you talk about it in the 80s. What is it like, and what does it mean for you?
So I can remember sometime in the late 70s, it must have been August, and my mom and I were going to Tops for Shoes to get shoes for school. And we had been down in Biltmore Village, and we're coming up Biltmore Avenue, and we were at the stoplight right there at the square. And I look over to the left. I'm like 8 years old. I look over to the left where Rhubarb is today. And that was G's Adult Bookstore. And I remember that day saying, Mom, why do adults need their own bookstore? And I really, really, really wish I remember what her answer was. And then we went and parked on Lexington Avenue. We parked on the end of Lexington Avenue near Tops, because the other end of Lexington Avenue had other kind of business going on that sort of related to what was happening at G's Adult Bookstore. And frankly, everything we passed on the way to Tops for Shoes is closed and boarded up. That was the 70s Asheville I grew up in. It was because of an enormous debt we had carried from the Great Depression, and because of suburbanization that was killing the rest of downtowns across the country, we were just in a weak position, and we were really hard hit. But because we'd been so broke, we couldn't tear anything down through much of the 20th century. And so folks, like several folks I see in this room, said, well, you know, why don't we turn misfortune into fortune? We've got these great buildings. Let's go back to our city. I mean, arguably, this is where the history professor comes in. Arguably, Americans were the only people that abandoned their cities. We're a culture that we walked away in the late 20th century, and it had everything to do from suburbanization and the automobile to racism. And we've come back in the last we've come back in the last 25 years nationally, but we were about 15 years ahead of the curve in Asheville because of having some really smart people and people that really gave a damn about their community. And part of what fueled that was tourism. And no matter how we want to cut it, it brought outside money in. That's sort of the difference between some of the other sectors that we look at. Some of the other ones, we're just trading money between each other. That, you know, I'm sick and I'm going to take my money that I earned in this location and pay this physician's office, and we're keeping that money sort of moving around in Asheville. But the tourism money comes from the outside, and it adds to what we have. Now, all that said, when I look back at these folks that I admire that did this work in the 70s and 80s and 90s up through today, there's a plan. I mean, I don't think anybody wants Asheville to become Las Vegas and a split between the tourist Las Vegas and north of Las Vegas where the residents live. And so when I think about how Asheville's changed in nearly 50 years of living here, I think that we're really fortunate to have an opportunity to have a revenue source to do something with. My background is as an urban historian, and so I go to other cities around the country and we talk about history, and I'm particularly focused on planning. And there's a lot of communities that don't have that. They don't have an opportunity for that. So we've got it. I think our charge at this point, and that's part of the work here, is how do we actually make it useful and valuable to the community? And that's on our heads. That's on all of our heads. Because not everybody's been part of it. And so how do we help everybody be part of it? And how do we use that to fuel the things that may not have anything to do with tourism? You know, when I look at that list, I see all those soccer fields we built. And I think how many times I went to my godson's soccer games and went to those fields. And most people don't know that it was outsiders that paid for all those soccer fields. And then the list sort of goes on and on for there. So I think I really don't want our community to follow, unfortunately, what I think is the national model right now. We get ourselves too polarized and can't have a real conversation. And frankly, I don't think that's the Appalachian way. Whether you were born here or you came here yesterday, I think there's a respect for people that's part of being in the Blue Ridge and in Appalachia because you just had to. When folks were living in the nooks and crannies and corners and hollers, they had to have some kind of respect for each other. And that's what I think we're being called upon. Wherever we fall on this sort of spectrum of what to do with it, it's how do we be respectful with each other. And I think frankly, Asheville's a smart place. We've got really sharp folks that we can figure out how we leverage this and be beneficial far beyond even what it's done right now.
Thank you. Thank you. I've said it before, I really believe Asheville can be a model for the nation, and I think this is just another example of how we collectively need to collaborate to be that model for the state and the nation. So again, I want to thank the panel. Mike, we're out of time. Himanshu, Stephanie, Kevin, thank you for your time and for being up here. Thank all of you for coming, and I want to give you one more slide that has the information about how you can get to the full report. So AshevilleCDB.com/TMIP. It's on the website. You can also receive updates for the process and online form. So if you have comments that you want to make, the online form is the best place to do that. Please feel free to go on and do that. I thank you. And again, thank you for coming tonight. Please drive home safely. Have a good evening.